Synthesizers. You hear the term come up in music and songs, especially the genres that geek about vintage equipment like funk, techno, and soul. You can trip on my synthesizer. Electronic world for every boy and every girl, in the words of Electric Six. Or as we hear through a talk box in Soul Clap's Synthesizer Girlfriend, I want to touch every knob. I'm going to show you that my love will never stop. Either you're in the know and have spent enough time with synthesizers to not need this information and should totally not press on because I'm afraid you're going to call me out for everything I'm about to share, or you're like me and know very little about this intimidating aspect of music making, or you may know not a single thing about synthesizers. Maybe you've seen the images before of big stacks of knobs and chords and patch cables weaving this way and that between mixers and sliders and keys. That's the image I conjure up when I think of a music studio laden with analog everything. But what is an analog synthesizer? Simply put, an analog synthesizer is a synthesizer that uses analog circuits and signals to generate sound electronically. Early entries to the library of synthesizers were built with vacuum tubes and electromechanical technologies. Later iterations relied on integrated circuits and variable resistors to adjust sound parameters, as well as used high-pass and low-pass filters to modify sound. The discussion of the synthesizer started in the early 1900s, thought to be as early as 1906, when a device referred to as the synthetic harmonizer was created by Scottish physicist James Robert Milne. As time went on, these devices that would outweigh a modern fridge and take up just as much space, if not more, became somehow more complex in progressively smaller packages, and sometimes even larger packages. The heyday of the analog synth hasn't really gone away, but the most prominent entries take place in the 60s and 70s, due to the fact that the 80s marked the introduction of digital synthesizers. Digital synthesizers did not kill analog, however, and in fact, the addition of digital to the market may have made analog synthesizers more financially approachable for starting artists. While talking to Rafael Marfil of Shiro Schwarz, we got on the subject of one of his favorite analog synths, the Prophet 5 by Sequential Circuits. Invented in 1977, it went into production for 6 years in 1978, saw 3 versions which added cassette patch storage and eventually replaced the solid-state music chipset with Curtis Electro Music Specialties chips, which, if you don't know what that means, neither do I, so you're not alone. The Prophet 5 was the adjusted shot taken by Dave Smith and John Bowen when they set out to invent the first polyphonic synthesizer with patch memory. They had first come up with the Prophet 10, which had 10 voices and 20 oscillators, but that was unstable, often overheating and causing tuning problems. They halved the number of voices to 5, divided the oscillators by 10, and came up with the much more stable Prophet 5. It was one of the more flexible synthesizers of its time, and even to this day it stands that way. The option to combine up to 5 wave shapes between the 2 oscillators made for a great foundation to build off of. And beyond the wave shapes, there were many modulation wheels for even more sound design. The Prophet 5 has seen a lot of action since its origins, having been used by the likes of Michael Jackson, Madonna, Dr. Dre, and even Radiohead. It's still used today by many artists and has even been replicated in soft synth form by Arturia as the Prophet V. Let's back up to that term polyphonic for a second and define that. Poly translates to many and phonic translates to sound. So polyphonic means many sounds. All that means is that a polyphonic synthesizer is capable of playing notes on top of each other as chords, which may not sound like much, but earlier examples of synthesizers did not have this capability and were known as monophonic, which translates to one sound, so you could only get away with one note at a time. The introduction of polyphonic synths drastically opened up the capabilities of these machines. While there was a decline in analog synth use due to the convenience of the digital synthesizer, there have always been and always will be those that gravitate towards the analog touch and sound. Even today, we can see manufacturers of analog synthesizers still kicking out models, and some people have even gotten savvy enough to DIY their own analog setups. With this small drop of information in the ocean of sound design, I still feel intimidated, maybe even more so, go figure, but I like getting into stuff like this. I've always had this glorified idea in my mind about the luster of being someone who operates solely on analog equipment to produce their sound. But as Rafael and Pamela mentioned in my interview with them this week, you don't need analog to make something happen. Learn to operate with the tools you have, and you'll be better for it when you can finally obtain those that you gain over time. Thank you for tuning into this bonus episode on synthesizers inspired by this week's guests, Shiro Schwarz. If you haven't listened to that episode, go do that right away, Skipper, because there's a whole lot you're missing out on. This is Cody Buchanan. Thank you for listening nonetheless, sir. I'll see you next time.